Happy Moon Day, Collective. Hope everyone's doing well. It's been a while since I've been chopping carrots in front of everyone. I found a bag of 5-pound carrots for $1.99 the other day, and I had to take it as a sign. I was like, all right, I'm being sent a message. It's time to get back behind the counter, chop these carrots up. To be clear, I have been eating the carrots, but I've been making my life difficult by taking out 2 every single night, peeling them, chopping them, putting them in my salad. And each time I'm thinking, when am I going to make this video? I've got so much to talk about. There's so much to cover. I've gone over this video in my head over and over, sure that I had a script in mind, and then just scrapped the whole thing because it seemed like the astrology was just astrologing too fast. And my general approach is, when you have to err on the side of something, you err on the side of just living life and experiencing the astrology. And whenever you get around to talking about it, you'll have all the more intel to use to process and report to anyone who's interested, so that they can sort of consider how this might resonate. And when I say this, I mean, I guess we're looking back to April 8th, but the eclipse, and then the eclipse aftermath, which was its own sort of thing. And then there was this sort of shift, especially where there's the residual of the eclipses, but I find that it's been, at least in the context of my life, but in what I've observed, sort of incorporated in and integrated as best as possible given the context. And we're all kind of trying to keep up with the pace. So I'll start by just thanking everyone that stuck around, and I appreciate you all. I can't believe that there are this many people that still want to stick around and hear me talk about the things that I love. I'm grateful that you all are here, because if it weren't for my love of this subject matter, there would be no channel. There would be no purpose for it. So my belief of things, and especially the things that we bother engaging in, is that if it resonates with me, then there are people out there that are the same in that respect, and it will find whoever needs it at the time that they need it. So I appreciate those of you that are here. And if you are new and you're just stumbling upon this channel and you're wondering, what in the world is this girl about to go into while chopping all those carrots? Well, then you should definitely go to the channel page and hit subscribe. I would really appreciate it, because I think that there's a lot of channels out there and outlets on social media that talk about astrology, but I find that astrology, being a very unique mix of science and art, um, I think is best presented in a way that is useful to everyday life. And, you know, you might put that under the broad category of mundane astrology. And there are mundane astrologers out there. But I find that sometimes uh, it's easy, especially when you're passionate about a subject and you know a lot about it. And this can be for any subject matter. Sometimes it's easy to get really in the weeds of it, and before you know it, you're kind of talking to other experts in the field, not necessarily intending to show off how much you know, but it almost just happens automatically. You get to a certain topic, and then you almost like throw in everything you know about it. And um, I like to try to keep this channel as much as possible. I try to reel it in a lot, believe it or not, and keep the things focused and useful, because after all, it's more, in terms of especially how I like to approach one-on-one consultations, it's more important to be helpful than to be right. And so I find that that is a good sort of rule of thumb for lots of areas of that involve like one-on-one service providing and you know, counseling and therapy, all kinds of things. So I will again remind everyone emphatically that I'm not a mental health professional or therapist, so don't even start thinking this is your substitute for therapy. If anything, um, if I were to have a big billboard to advertise the value of the way that I approach astrology consultations, it's really just narrowing in. I like to ask myself, like, what brought this person to see me anyways, because when you really unpack like the human motivation of it, there's usually something there that I can find in the chart, and I've narrowed it down to like about 3 different placements that can help you as the person having your chart read figure out what you might actually want to hone in on for seeking out a therapist. First of all, what kind of therapist? And as a lot of professionals who work in that context do, you're paying for their time. So sometimes, especially if your resources are limited, you might find it helpful to not want to spend the first few weeks or months um, just sort of talking all over the place for the therapist to eventually figure out why it is you're there and how to really focus your therapy. So again, I'm not a therapist or mental health professional, but I can usually pinpoint some areas that, at least from the outlook of a chart, would tend to archetypally create difficulties and challenges and tensions. So I find that those it resonates. Like I haven't had one exception to it, and I don't really know in terms of who I'm having consults with, who has a therapist, who doesn't, who's considering it, and who doesn't. That's not really my wheelhouse. But I do know that when they walk away, they can. They often say that they feel validated. Um, Even better when they say they feel hopeful. Um, but validated is a common takeaway, and I think that that can often translate into a, you have this sort of inner knowing and you just need sort of like one external, like some language that you don't necessarily speak but that can be communicated to you in a way that you can understand, that can sort of send you on the right path. You sense that there are many different routes you could take to sort of ease some tension inside. So I always aim to be like maybe that sort of like person at the welcome center of the dark woods you might be about to enter, the dark woods of self-discovery and sort of healing and whatever that looks like for you. And I don't mean to suggest it's always a dark process, but sometimes confronting things within ourselves, like sort of predispositions, but also like things that we've kind of structures we've built for ourselves over time that we're suspecting aren't holding up for the trajectory that we're on or the one that we want to be on. So I'm really excited because coming back around to this eclipse, the eclipse season, there are many different ways I thought about approaching it. And, you know, there's no shortage of videos out there talking about the eclipses. And because astrology is often an art, in some respects, you know, there are some fundamentals that can pretty much you can detect if someone knows what in the world they're talking about pretty quickly in that way. But then the art, you know, I'm always careful to not have strong opinions about other astrologers' approach, because that therein is the art form. It is a language, and so they're only going to be able to communicate the fundamentals. All things being equal, we all know the fundamentals. If um, you know, we're calling ourselves astrologers, and they're going to bring their unique experiences to the table, and sometimes their you know, educational backgrounds in many varied fields, and because it is sort of a symbolic expression of experience, like our own conscious experience, that is the limitation within which we operate. Which is why I love watching different styles of tarot reading. I mean, just to be exposed to that side of sort of the collective energy reading. And then same with like astrologers. I like to hear isolate one sort of transit coming up and then hear like a handful of different astrologers of all different age ranges, um, because I find that the same, they all seem to come around to the same thing, which I find to be the thing that drives me forward in the subject matter, over and over. It's just this sort of perennial um, source of enthusiasm, because it's just you're like, this person goes about it in this way and this person goes about it a whole different way, two totally different walks of life, and yet um, they all tend to come around to the same thing. And the only thing I do tend to shy away from is somebody that has like a very doom and gloom outlook on just things in general, because that's going to translate into how they read an event chart, so the chart of the moment, but also your chart. You don't, it's just like a therapist, not every therapist is for everybody. And you got to be careful who you allow to talk to you about who you are, if that makes sense. And, I'm very careful. It took me a really long time to get comfortable with saying anything to anybody about their charts. In the very early days, when I had friends gracious enough to give me their information, I studied these charts of the people that I knew best and communicated with most regularly. I studied them very carefully. And I mean, it took me a really long time to even say anything about their moon sign. Like, I realized, um, regardless of how serious they were taking it, it matters what you say to people just in general. But especially if you are aware that you have this, like, you're developing this kind of specialized knowledge that is available to everyone, by the way. I'm not, the only thing that makes me special is that I just was enthusiastic enough a couple, like 4 years ago, to dive into it with the seriousness that I would any other subject. And that has yielded some really great results all this time later, because astrology, there's no way to do a crash course. Like, you could just put your nose in the books for an entire summer, let's say, and that will never compare to the lived experience. Like, looking at the charts, and then living, like stepping away and then living, and then like looking at national and global events unfold, and then like pulling up a chart and then like observing and then stepping away and then living. That is how you really learn astrology. Not to mention, you got to interact with people. Like, if you don't like people and you don't like interacting with people, well, then you're never going to be, I don't want to say you're never going to be a good astrologer, but I mean, maybe I do want to say that, because astrology is necessarily enriched by interacting with the world around you, especially other conscious beings. So I find that going back to my own personal unfoldment between eclipse season and now, anytime I started to think, okay, I need to make an eclipse video, I realized that's not really even the attitude to have behind a video. Like, there's no, the whole I need to make a video was itself sort of a faulty premise for me, because I realized I would just be talking about technical movements of things. And I was in touch enough with my own feelings about things, that I had to believe that other people were still in the process of working out those kinks, and even just like trying to figure out what their feelings were, what the takeaway was or is. And you might still be there. I mean, I'm not to the other side of anything, but I do have at this point, and it's because I've actually let go. It didn't really start coming to me, to say that I have a place that I want to speak from that I think will be helpful to you, in a way that, again, might even be hopeful. Dare I say hopeful? So, with that in mind, I guess I'll start with saying, just fast forwarding to the present before I rewind. Today on what is this, Moon Day, Monday, June 17th, 2024, we have Mercury, mercurial, fast moving, takes rules Gemini, rules Virgo, fast, 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 communication, thinking. Um, it entered the sign of Cancer. So having just been in its home sign, Gemini, I think we all felt that it was very much in terms of tarot, swords, fast. It probably was not the best time if you have like your aim to get off social media and stop your like endless scroll addiction. That attempt probably failed miserably, I'm gonna guess, for the past like 3 weeks, if I'm gonna guess. Like that was almost like a fool's challenge. It was definitely the recommended advice I would have given, but it was like, with all those planets in Gemini, plus Jupiter being there, which it will be there for the next year. It's like, I think it's at like 4 degrees right now. It'll be there till next summer. So, um, but also at that time on June 6th, as some of you who follow my Instagram might know from some of my posts, there was a new moon in Gemini, June 6th. So that means when there's new moon, it's the sun and the moon conjunct. And so we had the sun and the moon plus Jupiter, which had sort of been a new entry to Gemini. And we had Mercury and Venus. So it was just Gemini energy abound very strongly. And then eventually, of course, we had the moon moving on, as it does every 2.5 days. But we still have the sun there, and we still have Jupiter there. But since we have had Mercury move on into Cancer, and we have had Venus move on into Cancer, and of course I think the moon entered Scorpio today, so all the more reason to kind of go into the depths. We're in the waters, you might say. We've got the Cancerian waters, the river, Mother Moon, Cancer. So when you put Mercury there, um, well, yes, feelings. It's giving feelings, but I prefer the pace of Mercury in Cancer versus Mercury in Gemini, because if we go back to the Three of Swords video, you may or may not have seen my Three of Swords video, but that reminds you that the pain that you experience is often originating in your thoughts. It's the Three of Swords is not a cups or an emotions card. It's a thoughts card. So that means that when we look at the numerology, three is what we create, and then we look at swords, which are thoughts, in that sense, and you see them all stuck through this heart. You're like, oh, well, that's the heartbreak card, but it's not. It's not a cups card. It's not an emotions card. So that's sort of an indicator as to if you're feeling heartbreak and you kind of want to shift the tone a little bit. Start with your thoughts as best as you can, and feel your feelings, but reel in your thoughts whenever possible. But with Mercury and Gemini, that was just I was struggling there too. There were too many, too fast, and it was, Gemini is also the dabbler, and it wants to like I've said before, it's TikTok energy. It wants to like go here, 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 and here. Not the best recipe for mental balance. So at least in Cancer, when we're moving from Gemini, mutable air, adaptable air. So adaptable air means like I can jump from here, 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 here to here. It's like, yes, adaptable, but that also means it can feel chaotic. So at least when Mercury goes into Cancer, which is cardinal water, it is it's the first water sign of the astrological new year, because Aries is the first sign. So we have our cardinal fire, then we have that followed by our fixed earth, Taurus. Then following that, we have our mutable air, Gemini. And then we get into the element of water, the first element of water to make an appearance since the astrological new year. And that is Cancer. That is cardinal water. And that means it is the initiatory, when it comes to the emotional world, water being emotions and feelings, sort of exploring the depths inside. Cancer is to water what Aries is to fire. So we've got the initiatory energy of feelings. And when you put that with Mercury, I think that makes for healthy contemplation, like going within and feeling. And the good thing about Cancer water energy that I like to remind people is It's like a river, you know, you're going to experience all of the emotions in the water because the river flows fast. But just as soon as you think that you're in the depths and you can't get out, like the river keeps moving. So um, it itself kind of requires a bit of emotional adaptability. Like Pisces is technically the mutable, so adaptable water, but that's because it's the ocean. It's like it lives in the collective emotions all the time. So it needs the adaptable title. But Cancer is adaptable in the sense to it's resilient water, you might say, because it has to be. You know, it's ruled by the moon. Moon changes signs every 2.5 days. So astrologically, that means you're going to experience, as someone with strong Cancer placements, um, the feelings of all the archetypes every month. Like as the moon cycles through all the 12 signs, um, you probably like are used to getting called moody, but it's like I'm not moody. I'm just ruled by the moon. Like it's not my fault. But it makes you, with that comes an emotional intelligence. Like you don't just get exposed or sort of intuitively feel all the archetypes every month without developing some unique emotional intelligence as a result. Um, so we've got Mercury in the sign of Cancer. And then we've also got Venus, you know, the planet of love and harmony and beauty and sensuality and artistic expression. So Venus in Cancer. Oh, Venus loves being in Cancer, of course. I mean, um, Cancer Venus is a really harmonious energy. It's very inviting. It's like when I put Mercury and Venus in Cancer in this week leading up to the solstice, which is another way of saying in this week leading up to the sun moving into Cancer, and the sun illuminates with its warmth. That's it's kind of like laying the grounds for slowing down a little bit and like feeling and artistic expression, you know, like leaning into your emotions, not drowning in them. I mean, that's you don't need to do all that. We've got Mercury, which is like your thoughts. It's like the objective, just enough detachment, like a Gemini, to observe your feelings from an intellectual standpoint. But you know they are in the Cancerian water, so to feel them, to not become them. And then if you are feeling a little bit lost in the emotional waters, well, then there's Venus for you in Cancer. So maybe like connect, like articulate how you feel to people that you love, your friends and like romantic partners and family, whoever. Um, and be expressive in however feels good to you. Like invite people into your home, go into other people's homes, like cook for people, nurture in a way that helps almost like channel uh, the energy of Mercury in Cancer. So that's where we are now. And with the moon having entered Scorpio, that makes for another water sign coming into play. Um, and moon being our sort of emotional world, and Scorpio being the depths. Archetypally, I have plenty of that energy in my chart, sometimes um, more than I would have chosen. So I figured this is a good time to really go there. I'm going to use this video to go there and sort of address what is beneath the surface for why it is that I get on here and talk about the things that I do. Like at the end of the day, yeah, astrology is fun and I like talking about it, but there is, you know, you might suspect that there's with the whole underlying theme of this channel and moonflowers blooming in darkness. And you know, as I put as the I guess like tagline, grow in the light, because anyone that's grown moonflowers, you have to put them in full sun actually, um, for photosynthesis to actually take place. It needs the warmth of the sun, but they bloom when the sun, you know, goes below the horizon. They bloom in darkness, and that's what makes them unique. And so, of course, the therapeutic horticulture metaphor just writes itself. And it, I don't need to explain. If it doesn't resonate, well, then there's nothing I can say that will make it resonate further than what I have. And so what drives me to talk about the things to weave together the seemingly unrelated things when looked at in a vacuum, they It might seem like 8 different subjects sometimes, but I'm really trying to present to people that have found that the existing structures, um, institutions, structures, whatever that means for you, have not really met them where they are. And that is, I find that's a lot of people, even people that came up in certain institutions or traditions that were supposed to be for that. It not every tradition is for everyone, and then sometimes the people that like are charged with leading us on that spiritual journey were never meant to be the leaders in that respect anyways. And I find that that's very much dependent on who you are, what environment you grew up in, what institutions or organizations you were introduced to and when. So I'm here for people that not only find themselves in a place of maybe self-discovery, maybe darkness, maybe both at the same time, um, looking for another way to look at things without being fed something that seems incredulous or like sort of Pollyanna-esque. Like I I myself have always struggled with like the, I don't want to say toxic positivity, but sometimes it can come off like that. Like thinking positive and all that, like that seems kind of empty without incorporating, like weaving some things in. Like give me something to work with as like an intellectual being who has been through some stuff and am going through some stuff, and I've got these thoughts and they're eating me alive. Number one, you just go to the basic rules of what they say meditation is. So let's start there. Meditation isn't just like sit there and clear your mind, because like that itself is a directive that seems impossible, right? Like who can actually do that? The real way to get to a meditative state is to take a thought that you haven't contemplated, like that you want to roll around, like in your mind, that challenges you to detach from what it is that normally occupies your thoughts. And it's essentially like creating like new connections in your brain. Like let your synapses or whatever like the technical things are, give them something new to chew on. And so often it'll come with like some little thought exercise, like in Buddha's like Zen practice, there's like several little like simple things, like a one line thing to contemplate that seems like hard to wrap your head around, but you still instinctively like kind of obsess over. You're like, how can that be? Or that's the point. It's something that's not meant to have an answer necessarily, but nonetheless, it's made you detach from what it is that's like plaguing your thoughts, like your normal habitual thought patterns. We all have those, and you've now attached to something else, and ideally in stillness, and even more ideally like outside or somewhere free of other distractions and input. And so I guess I'll call it a talent. I prefer to call it a talent. My talent, ever since I was young, has always been like thinking about things in like very strange ways. Like I will hear, have certain input, and like the way I will come about rolling it around, I can't help but incorporate this thing or that thing, or like come about it from a different angle. And I find that before I even realized what I was doing, that has been like kind of my coping mechanism ever since I was young, is like the way that I think about things is strange, and therefore um for most of my life I didn't bother to try to explain them, because it was almost like this thought process is for me, it helps me. And honestly, the feedback I get when I try to share it is well, usually not usually, but like I often end up feeling more like isolated as a result. So I've challenged myself, and I continue to present things in a way that gives you a glimpse of how I get through tough times mentally, because after all, you find yourself in a dark place that you maybe haven't been, um, you need new tools. Like the tools that you've used before aren't going to serve you in this new terrain. So the tools in this case are your brain connections. And so I'm trying to, if nothing else, give you things to ponder that are the result of my exploration of many different areas of expertise that most of them I'm not an expert in. I've just engaged with extensively, leaving, coming back, and then going back and coming back, and then weaving it into what the things I do know more about are, and coming up with like this like thing that sometimes presents as strangely coherent, as it turns out. And that itself is like is the thread of this channel, is how can I find a way to like marry or bridge together these disparate, seemingly disparate things, and sort of make the case for why even bother studying astrology, why even bother contemplating the um the idea that whatever happens right now has the quality of right now, as I've said in more than one way, but also more literally in certain social media posts. And that is a very Jungian, that's a Jungian principle, is like basically the whole idea of astrology. I pull up a chart right now of the sky, and that is the quality of this moment. And it's forcing you to look at like the clock ticking, and like me this morning and me at noon and me later, as existing in a series of qualities, like moments, instead of like looking at this chronological time being quantitative and hours passing. There's a quality to each moment, and over time, way before organized religion that we all are familiar with, mostly today, to help us organize and orient ourselves in that spiritual way, people have been tracking and observing their own experiences in life, their conscious experience, and then also observing, the skies, the heavens, the natural world too, like not just in the sky, but around us. And connections and patterns have been made, documented extensively across traditions. And so I just think if I can find a way to make it relevant to modern life, especially to the human condition, which seems to be colored by a lot of things, but especially as of the last few months and even longer, suffering. Like, how can we get out of? Because then that becomes its own habitual thought pattern. Anyone that has like suffered and been through a really dark time for a long period of time can tell you. Um, there's a whole different stage of when like the chaos is like died down and the towers have stopped falling, at least, and you're trying to calibrate, and then there's like this new sort of fear that has arisen of like it's almost like you're frozen. You're like, I don't want that. Like the boat is finally steady, and like there's almost this inclination to like cling, like to stay there, because somewhere inside you like don't trust your mind quite yet to be able to cope with like one tiny other thing. And like, so if I take a step in any direction, who knows what's going to happen. So giving people a way to look at things that uh suggest that like like when I look at a chart, it's the first thing I want to say when I really start to see a picture. I can start to see, I almost want to immediately say, like, just so you know, this right here was not, there's nothing you could have done about this. Like, I find myself there a lot, sometimes just to myself. There's nothing you could have done about this, or this period of time, there was a quality to this period of time, and like I can't explain why, but like when I look at the configurations, and then I bring in the planetary energies, and then I bring in the archetypes, and then I look at the area of life to where it's unfolding, whatever thing that you might be inclined to blame yourself for, that preceded that, just know that these themes were always going to be there in your life. And you know, that's as fatalistic as I get, because the free will is everywhere. I mean, there's always so many directions and so many different, I mean, like countless ways that certain lessons and what end up being your gifts, like your areas of personal expertise, because your life was always going to be one where this theme involving this area of life was going to be something that ended up contributing significantly to your growth if you're moving forward, if you have that commitment to. And so that itself can be a relief to some people, because when you let your mind do all the work, sometimes it's easier to just find a way to blame yourself, find a way to look at this step that you took and that, and you're like, well, if I hadn't done that, then I never would have been in this hellscape. Well, the more charts that you see as you learn astrology, the more you realize it's like kind of a relief. You're like, well, I didn't really choose to be like the Mercury of the underworld, but my chart suggests that no matter how hard I tried to avoid themes of death and rebirth and regeneration and power struggles and loss and weathering crisis with grit, like, you start to study astrology and you see the patterns and you're like, this was always going to be the theme. It could have been the lessons unfolding could have come in many different ways. And so I've really found that of course it's helped me cope, but I try to find ways to make that principle obvious to everyone. And like in every chart, there's something that seems like a curse, but it's also the gift. So you see a thing, you're like, well, I wouldn't have chosen this, but because I have these themes, and often it's several placements talking to one another. It's like one theme, and then when you read a chart, you file it to the side and you're like, all right. And then you go to kind of methodically to this next thing. You're like, well, that rings a lot like this thing, but we'll put it over here. And then like you get to like 3 and 4 things, and then you're like, okay, the picture really paints itself quite quickly after that. And that's always how it happens. Like it's kind of uncanny. So you know that's also what I've learned, is there's always a key. Like there is no such thing as a bad chart. There's no such thing as a hopeless chart. And so if I'm to extrapolate from that, and because I don't say that as just like a that seems like the right thing to say, I see that it's all right there. There's always a key. There's always, like, you get here and you're like, oh, that would be difficult. Ooh, that is challenging. And then you get to something else and you're like, oh, that is a uniquely beneficial quality for this chart to have, a uniquely beneficial thing. This is going to be this person's key. And that's the best thing, is when you can like hone in on that and present to someone, like, I don't know if you really realize how this isn't a thing that everyone is good at, or this isn't like a thing that everyone can do. Um, this energy that you have that seems to come quite natural, like maybe try channeling that as like a way to sort of cope and ease the discomfort of this, that kind of thing, like leaning into this archetype, even if you have to deliberately like imagine yourself putting on that costume to persevere through these things that are kind of pretty much like you're going to have to do. And so when I extrapolate from, there's no such thing as a hopeless chart, and a chart is just a snapshot of the quality of the moment that you're born, well, then that simply means that any given day that you or I wake up and everything seems kind of bleak, and you just think, God, like, I was born on the most cursed timeline, wasn't I? Like, why did I have to exist in this time? You can almost convince yourself that things are hopeless. I think we've all done it at times. And it's because, we have this screen and that screen. And so whatever's presented to us is generally highlighting over and over the most bleak parts of the quality of the moment we're living in. And so we're not used to, not only do we not see where the key is, because there is always one, but we might start to believe that, the era of having keys to get through hopeless times is over. You might think that, oh, well, I guess like all the good news is expired and I just live in the cursed timeline. And that's just not true. And so it's important to not take this as like trivializing or minimizing anything that you might be suffering. I'm just telling you that from a purely empirical standpoint, if I were to take a snapshot of the most hopeless moment that you find yourself in, there is a key. And even if you don't have an astrologer at your disposal, if you allow yourself the audacity to just believe that, that seems like a good place to start. If nothing else. In fact, that can do a lot of heavy lifting. So you don't have to understand what the key is. You don't have to know what in the world I'm showing you, even if I were to show you a snapshot of that moment. But just know there is a key there, sometimes more than one. So just allow yourself to believe that as a starting point. And going to the eclipse season, where we had, of course, the end of March, our penumbral lunar eclipse in the sign of Libra. And, Libra is ruled by Venus. So what we do in astrology to get the flavor underlying what the nature of this eclipse is going to be, we're gonna go, okay, Libra rules Venus, or I'm sorry, Venus rules Libra. Where's Venus right now? Oh, that it was in Pisces at that time. So there's that Piscean waters I talked about, the ocean of emotion, the collective emotions specifically, coloring the themes of that eclipse, which is why the kickoff to eclipse season started with it sort of like, wow, like there are a lot of feelings involved here. Who ordered this? And so I know my own personal feelings going through that. And then about 2 weeks later, we had our full solar eclipse, total solar eclipse in Aries. And so we go and we're like, okay, what's the ruler of Aries? That's Mars. Well, to get the flavor of what this experience is going to be, let's find Mars. Well, guess where Mars was? Mars at that time was then in Pisces. So then we're like, great. Mars in Pisces, sort of like aggression and anger and like passion, but also like strong feelings in the ocean of emotion. And so there was a reason that whole window of time, and like as anyone, any astrologer will tell you, like there's no such thing as like, okay, April 8th is eclipse, April 9th, we're good. Often the effects of eclipses can carry on for months and months because they generally are associated with profound shifts, um, and that often has like effects that take a while to like work themselves out, but generally like from the inside, like events that seem cataclysmic that are linked to eclipses. When you really get down to it, you're looking at humans, like the way events affect humans, the collective. Uh, Humans are what make up institutions and like governmental bodies across the world. So um, that checks out. And that is why everybody, these being collective transits, and then of course the themes of the North Node and Chiron, the wounded healer being in Aries, and the North Node in Aries, archetypally being wrestling with our sense of um, inner authority, like that whole axis of Libra in Aries is about self versus self and the other. What is that healthy balance between autonomy and inner authority versus interdependency, not codependency, but like two whole people existing side by side in an equal exchange, like the balance, the scales. And I think a lot of people started to realize, like, oh shit, I think I've got codependency issues. Oh shit, I think that I've got, it's not just with people. Codependency can manifest with like substances or like shopping or like whatever your little thing is that you are using to escape standing on your own 2 feet or like finding the answers within. That can, like, codependency has many faces. So there, when you go into the feelings part of Pisces, and then you're like grappling with these really, really big themes that have probably, you realize you have like some work ahead of you. You're like, oh my goodness, like kind of need rehab, even if it's not from a substance, from like a person or from like certain relationships. Like friendships can be codependent. Some people might have realized that they've gotten so good at like looking for external validation, they felt overwhelmed at where to even start. What does it even mean to go within, and what am I going to find when I go in there? And I think a lot of people instinctively just kind of like retreated within it. I personally noticed, like, despite my declaration to myself, oh, this is going to be like, I'm going to be out there this summer and I'm just going to go here, here, and here. And I've tried to do that as much as possible. But then sometimes when I was sure that I was going to like put something on my schedule to go here or there, um, there would be this thing on the inside where I was like, I just need to like slow down. There was like a mismatch. I realized that I would be like swimming against the current in trying to force something that like, the idea of it sounded great, but when I got to actually the feeling side of it, I was like, it's not quite right, like not quite right yet. And so I just ultimately surrendered to the spirit of the inner growth and contemplation. And every time I was sure, like, oh, I'm pretty much healed now, right? Like I think I'm good. There would always be something to where I would just like almost throw my hands up in the air. Not even some like event necessarily, just some unavoidable, inescapable realization or feeling. I was like, why are these feelings creeping up? Is often what it would be. I would realize like, I haven't thought about this in forever, and now here I am feeling so small and so um like I've taken all these steps back, and I just know how deliberate my work in moving forward has been. So that's why I had to trust it, and going back to this whole eating all these vegetables and chopping these carrots. I was like, well, at least I'm getting this part. At least I know I can trust these feelings, because the thing that I have been steadfast on is making sure that what I am putting in is giving me like nutritious stuff that isn't betraying me in terms of how my mind works. And that really was like the whole point of me doing these things on camera when I first started this, because when I felt like I could get nothing right and there were no answers, I was like, well, I'm going to go back to the basics. I'm going to go back to the science, to food science and nutrition, and know that if I'm going to be making these like important decisions and like relying on myself, I need my brain to be at its max capacity, whatever that looks like. And so it's good because, when you have these feelings that you're like, why are these creeping up? When you're, sober and have proper nutrition going in, that itself is giving you a sense of confidence. Like, well, rationally, that means I need to feel these feelings. At the end of the day, if I'm like crying and I feel like this emotional overwhelm about this thing that I thought that I had properly processed, you go back to the old adage of healing is not linear. And unfortunately, that applies to me too. As much as I like to want to make a spreadsheet of my feelings like a Virgo moon would, you still have to feel the full range. And sometimes it's going to creep up when you didn't ask for it. So I wanted to talk about the eclipses in that sort of like almost like debriefing type of way, because if I had gotten on there even a week afterwards, even a month afterwards, I'm not sure that there would have been much to say beyond like, you're feeling a lot of things right now, huh? Good luck. Just know that you're supposed to be feeling them. And that would have been honestly the best thing I could have said, because depending on who you are and what areas the Libra Aries axis governing your chart, those were the areas that you were really on a journey with and probably still are. So, we fast forward to now, and, one thing I did back during eclipse season, when I was actually still thinking I was going to jump on like a couple of days after the solar eclipse and make a video. Interestingly, I came up, like it came to me through drawing tarot, actually, like because I'm me. I was like visiting my cousin in Columbia, South Carolina. And I was sitting outside, not looking at the sky, but I decided I was by myself. There's no celebratory gathering with like solar eclipse glasses for me, because I just was like, this is a raggedy eclipse and I'm not celebrating anything. But I just felt like the need to experience it. I was like, well, I do know it's profound, so I'll sit outside with my feet in the grass, bare feet in the grass. And then I just brought out a deck of tarot cards and just like for the pure like childlike curiosity, I didn't look up and I just like kept my feet down and I just did several tarot draws. I did a couple sitting there and I didn't try to make sense of them. I just like did a couple in a row and then I snapped a picture so that I could go back later and then like see if I could like recognize any patterns. Like what is there, one or two things that kept coming up no matter what, sometimes in different configurations, but was there like a common like appearance across the spreads? And so what was interesting, and this also applied to the day leading up and the day after, where I would do this, just standing sometimes inside, sometimes outside, knowing I would go back and try to find these like patterns as I do for like everything. And what kept coming up, at first to my sort of like, surprise, I was like, is this a message for me? Like what? And then I realized, no, this is a collective message. I kept getting the King of Swords in reverse. Sometimes it would be right side up, but most of the time it would be in reverse. And of course, I'm just taking it back. I'm trying to make it about me. Like, are you saying I'm a liar? Are you like talking to the tarot deck or something? Like I had some beef with it. And it occurred to me, I was like, oh, the fact that it keeps coming up and I'm doing like deliberately trying to channel like a collective energy of a collective event, like permission to not make it about me. Great. Like, and so I really just like step back and then I had to notice the appearance of the Ace of Swords too. I was like, what would be the message here? Of course, there would be other cards in the spread because I for most of these ones I was doing like a 6-card spread, and so that's why it kept jumping out. Like the King of Swords will not just go away. It just kept following me around. And in not as many as the King of Swords, but in a statistically significant amount, the Ace of Swords would also be there, whether it was at the bottom or in a configuration any which way. And so that was the takeaway for me. I like had this epiphany like a couple days after, going to just the history of what people would do like back in the day when eclipses were generally thought it was like really foreboding events, and especially for shifts of power. And so if you were like the king, they often would like put in these like dummy kings. They would be so scared of what would befall the king, especially something with like a total solar eclipse, because symbolically the sun is Leo. The sun rules Leo, and Leo is the king. It's like the regal energy. It's quite literally royalty, embodied in the planetary archetype. So um, they didn't joke around back in the day. They would be like, well, if this event is going to take out the person on the throne, we're just going to put this disposable person over here, and we're going to put the king underground. Like great lengths would, a lot of people would go to great lengths to protect the king during these events. And so I kept coming back to that as like a theme, and then coming to these cards, and I thought that phrase, "the old king is dead, long live the king," came into my periphery. And the way that it did, I'd like to say that it was because of just those synchronicities. But what it came down to was, while I was staying at my cousin's house, I was also transformed. I was engaged in some garden projects. I was like, well, this is a raggedy eclipse energy, and there's like this kind of underlying like Pluto and Aquarius, like the Pluto sort of knocking down old structures, transform. I'm like, let's give it something to do. That's sort of my motto about really unpleasant, challenging transits. If you want to know the value is give the energy something to do so it doesn't do something with you. That's, if you want to know how I apply astrology to make it useful, that is my personal motto. So I was like, we're transforming this patch of earth right here. Like we are going to transform. So I make a playlist. I have a playlist that I generally play. It's very wide range of songs, but because I was going to be outside in this neighborhood that wasn't mine, and it would probably be something that neighbors could hear, I made a specific like kind of friendly family edition playlist where I just went into some I went in some old throwback albums that I had, and ones that I hadn't visited for a really long time. And so I just put a ton of songs on this like family friendly playlist, and I was like, well, whatever comes up from this collection of albums is I won't be offending any young kids out playing or something like that. It was just like that. It's just that simple. So um, along on my playlist on shuffle as I'm out there working comes the song Viva La Vida. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with like Coldplay or the Coldplay albums, but Viva La Vida was an album that came out in 2008. It was a great album. And I want to say it was also like the full name of it was like Viva La Vida or Death and All of His Friends. And of course, um, if you know the song Viva La Vida, um, one of the lines is the old king is dead, long live the king. And like it's preceded by this verse that's basically he's saying I used to rule the world, seas would rise when I gave the word, but in now in the morning I sleep alone, sweep the streets I used to own. And there's like more kind of poignant verses that are very much on point with the theme of the album. But when he says in the chorus, now the old king is dead, long live the king. Um, the minute I held the key next to walls, they'd close on me, just a puppet on a lonely string. Now who would ever want to be king? So the whole song is essentially about an ego death, really is but it's like got a celebratory feel. So it's easy if you're just like bopping along on the radio and you're not really paying attention to the words, to just be like, yeah, a feel good song. Well, it is meant to be a feel good song. That's like kind of I personally think the talent of Coldplay is like they convey these the meaning is conveyed not just through the words but through the instruments, like the feel of the song, which often seems like a strange juxtaposition to the words of the song when you're really listening. But there's a celebratory nature to that song. And what's really funny when you get into the astrology of that album, it is an album that marked the entrance of it was a Pluto transit album. And Pluto, as I've said, is like the planet of death and rebirth and transformation, sometimes literal death, unfortunately, and transformation that comes through enduring the loss as a result of the loss, but often, more often than not, like inner transformation that sometimes comes from like the tower or some like event that you never would have chosen, but that forces you essentially to die, like a version of you to die, and then to be rebuilt, sometimes from just the rubble, and ideally like rebuilt the right way, like in a more fortified, like a solid foundation type way. So what was funny is because I'm me and I'm like that line just like it hit me. I like stopped what I was doing and I was like, there it is. There it's the old king is dead, long live the king. Um, Not to mention the strange synchronicity of like everything going on in the UK with like the whole British family, which is its own like shit show side show. Um, that I didn't really want to get into and I'm not going to get into now, but it was also kind of comical. Um, those themes playing out. But the album Viva La Vida, so including that song, marked Pluto's entry into Capricorn because it was like a 15-year-ish transit per sign. So in 2008 was when Pluto was leaving Sagittarius and entering Capricorn. So it was marking, and you notice like it's a collective planet, and like the planet like that with themes that heavy, you notice the archetypal shift in energy. And that whole album is a song. Then I went back, of course, I became obsessed with it for like a month and listened to it beginning to end many times. And I'm just like marveling at like, oh, I love that I know astrology now that I'm listening to this album. It's so much richer now. But here I am like at this marking of Pluto embarking on its journey through Aquarius. So it's like what brought me back to that album was the sort of co-presence of these eclipses with the profundity of those themes, coupled with the Pluto and Aquarius energy, which is its own energy. And when you put them together, plus the other things, it gives us the quality of this time. So if you go to my Pluto and Aquarius video, I emphasize, like, yes, there were these events that seem scary in history where Pluto is in Aquarius, and a lot of astrologers like to make a big to-do of that. And they're not irrelevant, but the quality of those times was coupled with a bunch of other things that aren't going to translate exactly like now, for better or worse, actually. It's not a good or a bad thing, it just is. So I really started to understand archetypally, again, through stepping away from the need to make a video and just engaging in life, and engaging in the arts and the things that I like that generally help me get my mind away from the unpleasant thoughts. It's where everything really started to crystallize. And when I bring in the tarot, and I thought, the old king is dead, long live the king. And I think of the sword energy, and those are thoughts and ideas and truths. So I guess when you look at the eclipse theme, and then you look at like what the tarot was like dishing out to me, and then the little synchronicities that I would experience when I wasn't trying to like think about this, it it gave me the King of Swords in reverse, which is quite literally the objective execution of truth. Like, if you were to look at the king of any suit, you take him as that objective issuing of the energy of that suit. So the King of Swords upright is like truth. This is the truth. This is the objective issuance and standing and setting forth truth, the declaration of it. And so the King of Swords in reverse is like the old truth is gone. Like, it's whatever organizing principle that truth provided for me in my life, no matter how much I try to make it fit, it's the King of Swords in reverse now. But with that is the concurrent experience of a new truth, and often one that you weren't looking for. It just sort of, it's it presented itself by virtue of the death of the old one. And that is where I'm really honing in on. And that's where the phrase comes from. The old king is dead, long live the king. It first emerged like a French phrase, like Le Roi est mort, viva le Roi, something like that. Probably butchering it. And it was like first, the declaration itself was when Charles VII took the throne, immediately by virtue of the death of his father. So, like, his father, King of Swords reversed, but by virtue of the death of Charles VI, Charles VII is the Ace of Swords. If that, because the king is the truth. The king is everything back then. You know, that's what the monarchy, the whole idea. And the whole idea was based on the law of succession that stated, like, um, it all happened simultaneously. Like, the ending is wrapped up in the beginning. It's one strange emotional experience where, in one simple phrase, we mourn the death of the old and we celebrate the emergence, the immediate emergence of the new. And of course, back then, you couldn't have any lapse period, because that's how wars of succession came about. So, of course, don't get it twisted. Like, the royal councils and all, like, had every interest in being like, yeah, our personal view is that the minute the old king dies, at that moment, like, the kingship attaches to this guy that we've already set in line. Like, you know, it was a way to keep the power consolidated in the family, the way that power tends to want to do all the way till now. Just look around, and you'll find examples everywhere. So, but when we apply that principle to truth, and we look at the themes that have been playing out, especially endings and beginnings, being wrapped up into one, sometimes very strange, bittersweet emotional experience. to where logically we're forced to see that the old truth needed to die. We might not have been brave enough to kill it off ourselves, but it's gone, like sort of disillusionment. And but with that has sprung up this new truth, and that itself can be uncomfortable because this new truth is suggesting all these other pathways are available to me, and that is exciting and simultaneously terrifying because there's no like map for that. And we like to do things that are familiar because we feel like we're good at those things. We don't like feeling like we don't know what we're doing. And so if you have felt like you don't really know what you're doing the past, I don't know, all year maybe, you would be forgiven. And if you feel like you're still trying to figure out what are you doing, where am I going, you would be forgiven. But I needed to come on and do this video so that you could hear these words out loud and maybe feel like more in control of where you're going by knowing that just because people don't talk about these things, and probably because there's not a lot of casual conversation that delves into this topic, I'm sure. Just know that this is a collective feeling right now, and it's going to look different for everyone, but I think everyone is kind of trying on the new truth, so to speak. They're trying it on for size, and they're going out in the world and, putting it into practice here and there, into baby steps and learning by trial and error, as we do with a beginner's mind. And in fact, some of the tarot spreads that I put on, I can't remember if I put them on YouTube Shorts. So if you're more interested in some of the tarot spreads, I think I put some of them on this channel, but a lot of times they just end up on Instagram. So just look up Moonflower Collective on Instagram. It's not the Moonflower Collective, it's Moonflower Collective on Instagram. That would be thematically like what a lot of the spreads were saying, sort of adopting a beginner's mind. And there'd be a lot of sort of like mentions of like temperance would come up, and the idea of like not swimming against the current, and had to have patience in the process of like building your future, whatever that looks like for you, and sort of a surrendering, like an overall message of maybe try surrendering a little bit, and surrendering not being what we're wired to think it is, which is like feels like you're not doing enough. Sometimes not having the wisdom to step away and to stop forcing something is the thing you're supposed to be doing, and that's why it feels so challenging. So what really led me to get on the camera today to talk about this, aside from just wanting to somehow address the eclipse energy, but waiting till there was something that really felt true to my expression of it, is going back to my roots of going through the wormhole, as my mind often wants to do. And I've mentioned before, my favorite show, I've seen like every episode and every season multiple times, of used to come on, I guess, Science Channel. I barely remember what life was like when I turned on the TV and it was like just channel surfing. I guess the Science Channel, Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. And it was like a great show, and the way that material that was really complex and still like emerging more and more by each year, like leaps and bounds have really been achieved in the field of physics, the whole reconciliation of large body physics, so like Einstein physics, and small particle physics, which is quantum mechanics, like how things behave when you look at them under a microscope, where the theories of relativity and like Einstein's crux theories that still are the main drivers of like large particle physics, where they all fall apart. And that's always been fascinating to me. Like, I don't know, it's just one of those things to where I could not get over the fact that like here in this era, like these well-developed bodies of science, like where we end up when things get really wacky under the microscope is we just shrug and we go, well, who knows? That's just like what happens. And it's like, no, wait, like why isn't this the only thing we're talking about? Understanding physical matter and like having all these laws and like where we base our education, like, yeah, physics. Oh, but then like unless things are like this small and below, like then none of this applies. In fact, all of this fails miserably when we apply it to things on a smaller scale. And I just think that's interesting because right when you think you understand the way everything works, including like what we touch in the real world, um, and how important like the emphasis on materialism in the world around us in every respect, even that is such a faulty premise. Like even that is a something that is just, as time passes, gonna be its own. The old king is dead, long live the king. And it like is happening now, like right now. All these energies that I've just described in our personal life about like how do I reconcile what has been my objective understanding of truth, my truth, and the thing that is like sort of been the foundation that my whole life is built upon. How do I wrestle with the fact that that's just like it's like null and void now? I didn't choose it. It's just null and void. But in my pursuit of truth, like I have to insist upon myself. I'm not just going to like stubbornly cling to something that's like upside down. So what now? Well, you move forward and you try to like get to know this new truth. Like, what's this Ace of Swords about? And then you try to figure it out. And there's something interesting when I go beyond just like human mundane experience, and then I branch out in these fields of study. And so I want to link the most unusual group of people that I found myself like isolating and like sort of going down the rabbit hole with this person's like book or interview or something, and then like this person, that person. And so I'm going to tie in these four people. Go ahead and get a snack real quick if you're hungry, or pause or mark this time right here, because this is like a whole sort of ride that weaves in everything we've talked about, but like in a way that I would suggest would allow you to walk away with a whole new way of looking at what you consider objective reality. And this is honestly, like when I say I'm just going to come right out, I'm just going to go there. This is like, it's these thoughts that really underpin everything that I do when it comes to astrology, and like never being satisfied with just like, oh, well, this is just the way this looks. Um, Knowing that the further out you branch from your areas of comfort and what you think you're an expert at, the more strangely uh, everything starts to make more sense. Like, and so I want to first mention this guy. You might have heard of him. His name is Federico Fagin. So Federico Fagin is this Italian American physicist and engineer, and he has just come out with this book. The book was just like released June 1st, like not even a month old. I try to buy it. It's already like temporarily out of stock, of course. And it's called, first of all, I'll tell you who he is. He is the inventor of the first commercial microprocessor, like no dummy, first commercial microprocessor, touchpad, touchscreen technology, and like neural nets. Insane stuff. Smart guy. So of course he's got a lot of feelings and thoughts on this era, this like era of the unfoldment of AI and like the pace and all that. And he understands these things like intimately, like as the inventor of the first commercial microprocessor. And Federico Fagin, this book that came out June 1st, it's called Irreducible. And the I guess the full name of this book, let me just let's just get into it. It's Irreducible: Consciousness, Life, Computers, and Human Nature. That sounds like some areas that you might sort of like this channel think, what in the world are those words doing together on the title of this book from the guy who invented the first commercial microprocessor. Well, Federico Fagin has like clearly made it his business to very loudly remind us that there will never, and he just like boldly states, like in front of a lot of these talks with these organizations, like on a stage with tech people, just straight up saying like, no, AI will never be conscious. Because I know that that's what the big question is. Where is it going with AI? What's it doing? Is it going to replace humans? And in what capacity? And Federico, someone who would have the grounds to be able to know this and just say this so confidently, and he's like, first we kind of have to like delineate between intelligence and consciousness. Like he's like, intelligence is one thing and consciousness is another thing, and he finds it offensive to even suggest that that AI could be something that has conscious experience. Essentially, it comes down to he brings in things that are way outside of my areas of expertise, but he essentially uses existing like quantum theories, like two well-established laws of quantum theory, and then he brings in just what someone who has built a microprocessor would know about like the difference, seemingly subtle but still entirely significant, between the symbolic expression of something, so a code maybe or data, and the actual experience of it. So like the smell of a rose, as a human, you are experiencing it in a unique, in his way of explaining things, a unique quantum phenomenon, you and your consciousness. Like, yes, you could describe with symbolic expression to the best of your ability through an equation or through code, whatever. Um, you could describe as best as you could, even with words in a poem, the symbolic expression of what it's like to smell a rose. But the conscious experience of it, like what it actually smells like, is something that a AI could never do. That's like the thing that it will always fall short, no matter how brilliant and complex your code is, that you could come up with. AI could never participate in the unique quantum phenomenon of the conscious experience of smelling a rose, the conscious experience of like how the wine tastes, the conscious experience of love. So, for example, I love you is the symbolic expression of the feeling that originates within. It's closed, it's private, it exists and unique. It's not observable from the outside. It's just something that you experience as the unique closed quantum phenomenon that you are. And then generally the best we can do on the fly is we say I love you, and like you can say it with certain tone and like pair it with physical gesture or whatever, but still it would still always fall short. Federico reminds us of the feeling, the profundity of the feeling from which the symbolic expression originates. And it sounds simple, but really it's like simple and like almost like really deep at the same time. You think, yeah, it seems obvious, but it's like it seems obvious, but the way that we're going with AI, it's almost like we've forgotten that, right? So, excuse me, let me get a little sip of water here. I want to talk about this because Federico basically is reminding us of the quality of moments. Like, I talk about the quality of this moment that we live in, and like the planets, I look at a chart and it's like this symbolic expression of the quality of the moment. But the best I can do, and anyone can do, is look at these patterns and hopefully have a really good vocabulary, and then try to connect with another human. And at the end of the interaction, if I've done a good job, they know that feeling, that like thing that exists closed on the inside of them, is maybe something that the person talking to them also knows of. Now, my experience of it could be unique, but there's this it's like in this pool that's available to all of us of experiences, and it's the delight is in realizing that this person in front of you can relate to that, the thing to where I might fall short with the symbolic expression in one way, and they might fall short in the way that I'm good at, and vice versa. It's like these two separate quantum phenomenon with their own private experiences, tapping into that shared, almost archetypal experience that one person has somehow managed to express using like a language of these glyphs, and they're talking about planets, but that someone else who's like a really great artist, like, yeah, this, what you've just said reminds me of this piece of art I did, and it was like I did it, it was me like bringing what's inside to the outside for other people to recognize. Like, their symbolic expression of it is something totally different. So that's where I talk about like the art part of astrology, how it's important to understand nuance, and to see things as like a kind of gradient. Like, there's no right or wrong, but the scope with which we, as an astrologer, I could learn to maybe communicate that is important, because the whole goal is to walk away with kind of both of us feeling seen in a way, like sort of a meeting of shared experience that like in their life was one thing and in my life was another, but we found a way to establish that sort of recognition in one another of it. And so I think that's also like when you look at someone like Federico, and why he would choose to essentially go shouting from the rooftops and like have this book, and like after such a life of accomplishment, he could literally just be vacationing in the south of France for the rest of his life, not worried about the chaos of the collective at large. He apparently sees it as very important to remind us that meaning uh, is not derived from symbols. It's the other way around. Like, symbols are the best we can do to communicate the deeper meaning of our conscious experiences, and um, essentially bringing us back to like what it means to be human. And it seems interesting that someone that smart and accomplished, who is essentially made his entire name off of technology and the advancement of technology, that he would find that to be like his sort of closing life statement, and continued work out in the world. And as a like side note, he received the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, which is apparently the highest honor that the U.S. Bestows upon someone for achievements in technological progress. And that was in like 2010. But apparently in 2011, he founded the Federico and Elvia, I'm guessing that's his wife, Vagine Foundation, to support the scientific study of consciousness at U.S. universities and research institutes. Um, and so he finds the continued study of this to be very important. Um, And then we're going to jump over, to a totally different branch where someone else who's very accomplished in their field is essentially has come to this same conclusion from a totally different wing. And that's where we have Professor Donald Hoffman. He is a cognitive neuroscientist and cognitive psychologist, professor with many different, like several joint appointments in like the fields of cognition and like technology. And he went to UCLA for his undergrad studies, and like worked on programming, like back when programming was like really a big emergence in the 70s. So I think it was like 74, he said. He's currently at UC Irvine, but he's been with the UCLA system since his undergraduate studies. He worked on, let me see, he worked on military microprocessors and machine code, worked with Hughes Aircraft in undergrad at UCLA. He went to MIT in 1979, worked in their AI lab. So that was like a really emerging thing, back in 1979. And he did his PhD, he got his PhD there and like made his thesis on something more focused because, in order to actually like churn out a PhD dissertation, you got to narrow it down to something. And so for him, it was how do we see in 3D and recognize objects? A deeper understanding of the mathematics underlying perception is essentially what came from those studies. So then he like essentially narrowed his focus to especially like the visual field, and how contrary to what he expected when he went into this field of study, he expected it to be more looking a lot like a picture taking process, like our visual reception, like how it works, like how we take in information. He was expecting something that looked a lot like a photo taking process, but to his like amazement, it actually resembled a lot more something of a construction process. And he found that to be really interesting, like the complexity of the mathematics involved and how it looked a lot more like building instead of snapshot taking. And the more you get into like a specialized study like that at that level, you start coming upon all this really complex information and like math that he probably wants to shout at the rooftops, like at many different stages of like, do you guys know, like, can you believe this? And of course, all of us are like, no, we have no idea what any of this means. Sort of like when I'm like coming upon some astrological thing and I just desperately want someone else that knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so that pretty much like sparked his entire future journey and like the obsession with like studying, because the common aim among neuroscientists has been looking at the brain as primary. So the substrate of the brain as like the source, and then like consciousness stemming from the brain. So that's essentially where, and like still to this day, the vast majority of neuroscience is focused, like unpacking the brain and slicing and dicing it and studying it. And we're going to find this location. We're going to find these series of connections. And oh, we found consciousness. We found it. It's right here in the left side down to the bottom. And like that is the generally accepted like mainstream way of pursuing consciousness studies in the field of neurobiology, neuroscience. Well, Donald Hoffman, being like who he is and having gotten on this tangent in the ways that I've described and the path that he's been on, around like 2008, he was just like, I can't help but think that like based on what I see and the way that the complex mathematics, and how can it be that we're like, are we reconstructing reality? Like, is there this like objective reality that we're in that process of constructing, and how our visual perception works? Are we all just like going through our own process, but still reconstructing the same thing? Or is this like sort of a de novo construction process? In other words, like, are we all like really perceiving the same thing? Like, if I'm looking at this and you're looking at it, is your construction process like de novo, and then so is mine separate and individual from yours? And in which case, how do we even know what your version of the color purple is versus mine? Like, that kind of thing really gets in the weeds if you let it, and I definitely went into the weeds with it. So just know that I've really like narrowed this down as much as I can. But he essentially has come to this conclusion through all of his studies, including in 2008, revisiting. He he kind of did this like objective framing, like a question that could be like studied using mathematics and like the existing principles. What is the probability that evolution and natural selection has shaped any sensory system of any organism to ever see any aspect of objective reality truly? Like, what are the odds that, like, if we go to Darwin's theory, which is like, you can like look this up if you're really interested in getting in the weeds, evolutionary game theory. It's been through people's work in the 70s. They actually took Darwin's work and they made it precise to the extent it can be made precise. And a lot of us like learned this in like if you took advanced biology and stuff about like natural selection and like um, what traits survive over the course of selection over time in a species and why, whatever. You can go into that. But basically, using all the accepted non controversial science, including the evolutionary game theory, he came to the conclusion that it was very unlikely and like statistically like proven each time it was like basically zero, and anytime it wasn't zero it was like such a statistically insignificant showing that all roads lead to zero, that it was entirely unlikely actually that any of our constructions are the truth. Like the way that the visual process works in the brain, like taking all these steps over all these years, um, and then taking even on this new study and isolating it into an even smaller question that to his actual surprise and annoyance, because it was like, what in the world does this mean now, and what does that mean for everything else, that no, there is a, it's very unlikely that your construction process when you're like looking at something and perceiving it, that it's the actual objective reality, that any of us are actually perceiving what you would call like a constant truth that is everlasting and steadfast. So when you sit with that, and then you bring it to the ideas of like consciousness versus the brain, and or consciousness versus the physical substrate, like is there like a starting point? Like what we want is like this physical thing that's the starting point, and then it's like top down, like consciousness stems from that. And that's just not where the science has led. And this is like an emerging thing actually among neuroscientists that have found themselves not scared to look like the odd man out, really. um, and he has come to this conclusion, and like in this interview, this was like 2 weeks ago, this interview, by the way. He's literally in like one, this is a quote that he starts at the beginning with, in essentially starting with the whole realizing consciousness is itself fundamental. Like it's not the brain that's fundamental, it's consciousness that's fundamental, which suggests that consciousness exists outside of like the physical substrate of the brain. And he's like tripping over himself like so hard, and like, you know, prefacing it and like disclaiming. He's like, I know how this sounds, and he's like actually like kind of pulling his own hair at one point, grappling with this new truth that he is forced by the science that he himself has dedicated his whole life to. But by following this process, he cannot escape this conclusion. He's like, I got bad news. Like, I regret to inform everyone, including myself, that we're never going to find consciousness in the brain. Like, we need to stop everything. And we need to like dramatically reroute and go back to the drawing table when it comes to what we're even doing as neuroscientists anymore with this. Like, if we're going to study consciousness, we need to literally flip the entire approach on its head, like, no pun intended. And so he starts with this quote, and he says, intellectually, I'm there. The math has completely convinced me. Our best science has convinced me this is true. We'll see when my emotions come along for the ride. Professor Donald Hoffman, a cognitive neuroscientist, cognitive psychologist, grappling with his own personal, the old king is dead, long live the king, except in the context of like what he has dedicated his entire life to studying. And at the great inconvenience, he realizes he's like the odd man out. I mean, there's like more than just him, but you know, the status quo, the thing that's convenient, and like if you don't want to lose your funding from mainstream funding, you're like, yes, we're gonna still keep like slicing and dicing the brain. We're on it. We're gonna find consciousness in the brain, but like the science just suggests the opposite, which is interesting. And if that isn't like a really interesting microcosm of what you kind of see all around about like going through the motions, as if it was business as usual, when everyone, you suspect way more people than you, sense like, what in the world are we doing? Like, I know that like you can't just go out and be like, what are we doing? Like, stop everything. We need to like start from scratch. But I can't. This is thematically what I am seeing across like fields, like across like situations and contexts. And so there is again a distinctly collective flavor to this, the quality of the moment that we're living in this respect. Sit on that for a second. So poor Mr. Professor Hoffman is probably still grappling with this. The interviewer asked him, like, kind of joking, you know, like, how do you get anything done now? Like, are you not just sitting there in your office, like, banging your head against the wall and kind of making a joke? And, you know, they're both like very aware of how exciting this is, but how inconvenient it is. It's like, well, what does this even mean? Like, what do we do now? All right, so consciousness is primary. Consciousness is fundamental, not the brain. Apparently, nothing exists unless it's being perceived, which is what the quantum physicists have been saying from the beginning. That's like the whole idea of like Niels Bohr's experiments and all that. Like the and the way, funny the way Einstein reconciled this when this these sort of irreconcilable things that you saw under a microscope were clearly like glaring holes in his theory. I don't know if you know this, but like the way Einstein reconciled it, which was kind of brilliant. So in case you ever beat yourself up for not having the answers, just know that Einstein, like brilliant namesake of like large bodies of like laws of physics, his personal phrase for the behavior of quantum particles, he literally called it spooky action at a distance. Those were his words, Einstein. Niels Bohr's like, so what are your thoughts on this? He called it spooky action at a distance. And this guy still had like all these theories named after him that still exist today. So uh he was profoundly unserious. Like he was serious, but like he was just like, oh, well, I did my part. I mean, and so just like science, we do the best with the latest that we have. Like, and so you know, there are actually efforts across the world that have gone into realizing like, well, yeah, science is like we take the best theory we have until like something better comes along with further study. And you know, it's kind of odd that in this modern era we're all like talking about let's populate Mars, but we're still calling like things spooky action at a distance. Essentially, like we're just gonna stick with what Einstein saw as like how to deal with what happens with small particles versus large bodies in terms of physics. So apparently, like according to Donald Hoffman, he said that just like within the last few months, the European Research Council has apparently like put forth like 10 billion euros into the study of like essentially creating a whole new framework for physics, which it's like a lofty ordeal, but at the same time, like it's about time, like someone needs to with all the resources out there and how lofty our goals for the future seem to be when it comes to tech, what seems that understanding the physical world that we just prioritize so much and like yet rely on and also take for granted, like it seems strange that we still have not come up with some more cohesive framework. So stay tuned, like maybe look up the European Research Council and it's called maybe Google if you're interested more in this, European Research Council, and the project is called Universe Plus. That's what they're calling it. It's the 10 billion euro endeavor. So I personally am really fascinated to see what they're going to do with this because it seems long overdue. And if you're interested in like Donald Hoffman's work, like if you're somebody who is so inclined to look at the math and like the formulaic side of how he has come to these conclusions, he has like many published papers. So you could either type in Donald Hoffman, UC Irvine into Google, I think like, what is it called? Google Scholar? I think that's what you call it. You can Google him there. Or you can apparently Google objects of consciousness, fusions of consciousness, and Donald Hoffman, and you would find publicly available papers with like the math laid out. I'm not going to do that, but like maybe if you're watching, that's your wheelhouse. So we've got Mr. Professor Donald Hoffman sitting here saying that the reality that he has dedicated his whole life to studying and the presumptions or assumptions upon which all scientific theories like start, you have to have some set of assumptions that we all operate from. That has literally been turned on its head, but with that has emerged a whole new truth that opens up a world of possibilities, but like it's like frightening and exciting all at once because you're like, what even is reality? Like what does this mean? I literally have studied the brain my whole life. I love the brain. I am team brain, and as it turns out, it's not the brain that's king. It's consciousness that's king. And it's funny because the whole point of this whole hour-long interview, the guy says to him as he's like sitting there just still trying to let it all soak in, both of them really. He reminds Donald, because he goes, so if this is all true, then like, what is consciousness doing? Like, what is it up to? If it's its own thing and it's the fundamental thing. And Professor Hoffman says, I don't know, but maybe what consciousness is up to is trying to know itself. And he's coming upon this like just from like a scientific hypothesis when looking at the totality of everything, and he's thinking, well, what would be the point of all that? And he's like, well, there's no such thing as a theory of everything, which is kind of a relief, and also depending on who you are, frightening if you're someone that has like relied upon steadfast rules and things that you thought were indestructible truths. And he sort of the interview says like, he's like, I don't, I realize this wasn't really your aim, but for what it's worth, I think your work has done something for people that find themselves grappling with like the idea of spirituality and science, and like wrestling with the two and for people that can't get there for whatever reason, that have trouble with like surrendering to something, or to the idea that they're part of something grander, that like seems significant, that makes you, that suggests that what you do matters a lot more than like just sort of this nihilistic like, oh, whatever. But that like the common structures or organizations or institutions have come up short for you, like, but you're still the kind of person that like deeply feels the need to have an understanding, um, and that you can't escape that drive, that you know that there's something out there, um, and you don't know what it is, and how work from someone like Professor Donald Hoffman, who's just trying to like find the source of consciousness in the brain, and like just took the steps like one by one by one, and then it's like these things are jumping out at him, and then he just can't ignore them, and before you know it, he's flipped everything that he assumed about reality on its head, and now he's like, oh, surprise! Um, as it turns out, I think spiritualists and scientists can sit at the same table and maybe actually start with the same set of assumptions, is essentially where he left off, again, to his own dismay. Um, and I find that what he said at the end, he was like, there's no theory of everything, and at the heart of it all is a great mystery. And he says, you are that mystery, talking to people. And I was like, that's kind of what if you talk to an astrologer who just like can't explain their deep need to just like learn more and more about astrology, and like look at the stars when this happens and that, and to like study this even more, and like um pull threads here and there. It's because the more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn, and the thing that drives you is you realize like um how it's like, yeah, you're just a snapshot of the quality of the moment that you're born, and to that extent you're not that special. You're just that, like, there's a quality of every single moment, and I was just born at that moment, so there's my snapshot. So it's like in seeing it that way, it's like a relief. You're like, oh, I'm not that special. But at the same time, in seeing it that way, you start to feel like profoundly special. But not only that, you realize everybody is like, that's the thing. It's sort of, again, the old king being flipped on its head, and then here's this new truth, and one springs up because of the flipping of the other, and it's both a relief and startling. It's like I feel like not a big deal and really special at the same time. And I think that is I think that's the takeaway, is your, this has been said in many ways by spiritualists and like some sort of more fringe branches of scientific study, especially like parapsychology, like telepathic studies and stuff. But especially like a lot of spiritual traditions, which tend to be centered around the idea of fractal, like us all being a fractal, like all of us, the information of the whole being encoded upon each little part, like, and look no further than like horticultural studies, and like contemplating an acorn, and like the acorn being the fruit of the oak tree and also the seed of the oak tree, and like a cutting from a succulent, and it's like one little piece, but like in that one little piece is encoded the information to create the whole. And it doesn't even necessarily look like the whole, but the information is all there. um, and how these things can be applied. You can see these patterns across species, and it seems to be this universal principle that isn't just manifest in studying natural sciences. It manifests in just like purely spiritual traditions as well. And So Professor Donald Hoffman was saying that he sort of he can't help but foresee a very fruitful sort of meeting in the middle of the spiritual community and the scientific community in the future, which I personally already, I mean, I see that happening now. I honestly, it's like the space that I aim to occupy with this entire channel, while also like not knowing the answer. I'm like, well, I don't really know the answer, but like, listen to these crazy things that I have compiled over the years of exploring different rabbit holes, including astrology. And so Professor Donald Hoffman, the cognitive neuroscientist and cognitive psychologist, has essentially come around in his own path to where the inventor of the first commercial microprocessor, Federico Fagin, has come to. And I'll throw in there just for variety, a woman named Pam Gregory. And I'm not going to name all these like credentials. She might have them. I don't know. The point is she's never bothered to really tender those as relevant to her very simple conclusion. She regularly says she's an astrologer in the UK, like 45 plus years of experience. So that's what she holds herself out as. And she has a YouTube channel, very insightful, like just like someone who's been studying astrology and has the wisdom of someone her age for that long would be very insightful. And she regularly says in like helping coaching people through coping techniques like grounding, like psychosomatic principles of, you know, bare feet to the ground and visualization, things that aren't really fringe at all, but just to help people. Like her obvious point in getting on there each time is to help people. It's abundantly clear. And so I really appreciate what she does, but she often ends her videos with a reminder, like, you know, you might be suffering, and like, you know, I understand these times are difficult, and just remember, consciousness is primary. And she says that regularly. Consciousness is primary. And what's funny is like she didn't like not some like programming background or neuroscience background, um, because essentially Professor Hoffman ends his like whole long life's work with like consciousness is fundamental, as it turns out, not the brain. Well, he's saying the exact same thing as this astrologer for 45 plus years, who is more like a healer and like coach to people. And she just regularly, as a mantra, reminds you consciousness is primary. So if you're ever wondering about the unlikely intersection of your life themes that seem super specific to you, and like these kind of grander I guess areas that have led people that probably look very different from you at this moment in time to these same confrontations with new truth that seems to not fit. Like there doesn't seem to be a place to put it yet, but like you can't get rid of it. And I think that if there's any sort of like summation point and collective theme that you probably are living right now, for better or worse, sometimes the new truth is like, man, this is like a lot. What if things could get a lot better than I thought, is how I'm choosing to look at it. And I'm not even having to try that hard to see it that way. Like, do I have the answers? No. I mean, I don't, in terms of my specific like life, there are so many things where I'm like, don't know, wish I did. The year ago version of me would be freaking out because I don't know. And for some reason I'm just not. And it's not because I've escaped. It's not because I'm on a fun drug that helps me not care. And it's not because I've just stopped trying and have decided I don't care what happens. Something stranger than that. I'm just like, I don't know. I'm starting to see things differently and from a very non-spiritual place. Like that wasn't my aim. It was just like sort of the logic has led me here. I'm looking at these patterns and I'm like, huh, as it turns out, this set of things could actually manifest as this too. And so when it's just you and your thoughts and you're just so sure, you can see how things are going to play out, and you're just so sure that you understand all the pieces at work in your life, even if nothing, for no other reason than your own coping. Maybe just think like, okay, yeah, things can get worse. Of course they can. They always can. But man, they can get a lot better. They can actually get far better than you've actually allowed yourself to imagine. And sometimes the challenge can be um, reorienting your own idea of yourself, um, so that you can then start renegotiating your relationship to things outside of yourself, if that makes sense. So when in doubt, go back inside and go, well, do I really understand who I like? Is my symbolic expression of my conscious experience, could that stand to be like expanded upon? Like, could I maybe revisit some creative endeavor that helped me to do that when I was younger? Um, Maybe that beginner's mind, like that Page of Pentacles attitude, maybe the tarot is onto something there. Like maybe I should, just for the sake of my own, to give my brain some new connections, because these old ones are just not hitting, just give it a try. Why not? I mean, if you're on a new path, why are you using the old tools? Like, you've already used those, and you're not going to some place you've already been, if this is resonating with you. So why not try out some new tools? And so here I am on my last carrot. I've filled up this entire bowl here. Feels really good to have come back to these discussions at this very interesting time to be alive. And I think the next thing I'm going to try to do is get out of the weeds. I've taken way more notes. I had a lot of fun actually preparing for this video, and I shaved it down so much. But I think the next thing I'm going to do to kind of get that right brain involved a little more is probably a card pool, because we do have solstice coming up on the 21st. And I feel that maybe go and watch that video I did that it's like 20 minutes, where I talk about it's like where you see as the thumbnail a chart. I did it for the Gemini new moon, but there's also the good thing about it is I do a more broader explanation of like sort of what the vibe has been with the lunations of the first half of 2024 and how they've been off axis, and that's when I start dipping into what's coming up about the full moons that we have in Capricorn coming up, and how the solstice plus like the full moons in Capricorn and then the new moon in Cancer, how we're finally going to essentially get on track with the lunations. They're going to be on axis, and therefore the energies will feel more conducive to like applying this, like this Ace of Swords, this new energy that all these off-axis lunations, no matter how hard you've been trying to like find where your Ace of Swords, your new truth goes, um, even the most steady-minded person has probably been lost in that respect. So go back and watch that video if this sounds interesting to you. Otherwise, chew on all this. I mean, you've got plenty to chew on after all this, and maybe stay tuned for the next card pull, and I'll see what comes out. Again, thank you for being here, and I hope this helped whoever you are, whenever it finds you. And take care of yourself until next time. Bye-bye.